this computer.
Cool.
Okay, let's start. Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to this week's edition of Imperial as One's Belonging series, where we explore the lived experiences of individuals from the Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities who share their stories and help us to understand what it is to be an individual from an ethnic minority in this country. I'd like to just welcome our guest today. I'm going to give her a big build up. As I had a really good conversation with her earlier on in the week, and it's Tamanna Kabir. And Tamanna is a research nurse on the Grenfell firefighter study, but that's not really what we're going to be discussing. We're going to be discussing her sense of identity, her sense of belonging. So, Tamanna, I'd like to just say a big welcome and thank you for agreeing to be our guest today. Let's start off with my usual question. Can you tell me a little bit about when you were growing up, what it was that helped you to get your sense of belonging, your sense of identity at home?
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me, because I used to watch this when I was working from home some days during the pandemic. And yeah, I used to really look forward to this lunchtime chat. So I can't believe I'm a guest on it now. Yeah, so we were chatting about this earlier this week, how going through school and being someone who's of British Asian as well, what my experience was like. I would say, like, when after I reflect talking about it with you, I think my parents definitely gave me skills to kind of live in both worlds. So live in like an English world as well as a Bangladeshi world, which is where my family's from. And somehow when we went to school, we were able to be a bit of both. So I think like in primary school, I felt very comfortable. I was around people from lots of different backgrounds because I went to, it was a school in South London, which was very mixed in terms of ethnic backgrounds and things like that. But it was when I got to secondary school that we were chatting about how things changed a bit for me. And I think that's when I definitely questioned my sense of belonging a bit more as a young adult.
Can you kind of like, what was the situation when you got into secondary school? What kind of secondary school was it, and what was it that kind of like made you feel maybe uncomfortable, or what was it?
So it was a private school. At the time, I've got two siblings, and we all got assisted places, which I'm not sure how familiar people are with that term now, but it's when you basically get a scholarship, you get funding to go to a private school if you come from a low income background. So when my brother got it, and then my sister very fortunately got it, and then I somehow got it too. So I think from the onset, I was very aware I was going to a very different environment to all my previous friends from school. And I got some dribbles of information from my siblings of what it might be like, but I didn't realize what my experience would be. And I think I remember my first week when I got home from school, I just would tell my brother, I would just be in tears and be like, I really need to learn to be posh. And it sounds ridiculous now, but I think I was so young and I just realized that, gosh, none of these people are like me, and what am I doing here for the next 7 years?
When you say they were not like you, and what was it that made you? What was it that made you feel that there is a difference? There's a sense of difference. How did that impact your sense of belonging and who you were?
I think it was a few things. So like I spoke a bit different. For one reason or another, I was a young Bangladeshi girl with a Cockney accent, but there we go. So I sounded different to people, and I was very tall. I also looked different. I was brown, and most people in my class were, young white girls. So that I felt different, I looked different. I also had a different education, I think, because a lot of them, they had been to like preparatory school, which is very different to, I think it's very different from primary school, where they had learned French, for example, or they had done like, different types of sport, whereas we just kind of played in the playground and spoke English. So from the onset, I think and also my name beginning with K, I was right in the middle of the alphabet. So I sat right in the front, right in the middle, this tall Asian girl thinking, where am I?
So there was loads of factors which were saying were almost like saying you're different.
Yeah,
Would you say
yeah.
was that part of the situation? Would you say?
I would say so. I mean, like, I can't say that people came out and told me I'm different. Although, actually, I would say there were sometimes maybe they said it in a diplomatic way. I
Right.
don't think people were used to seeing someone like me in
Hmm.
that environment. It could be very different now. It's a very good school, but I think at that time, I felt like, oh, I don't do those things. I'm not going to go on these skiing trips with you. Um, I don't think I can socialize with you after school. Like, I just felt very separate. And that's why I just said, you know what, I'm going to focus on getting a good grade and leaving. I'm not really going to prioritize making friends in this environment.
Right.
Yeah.
So did you have many friends, or were you just really focused on let's get my education and move on? I know the advantages that I can gain from being here, but was the social aspect something which you thought, well, that would be useful to have, but not too bothered?
If I'm completely honest, I wasn't bothered about the social aspect. I think I knew very early on that these people, and perhaps a lot of me as well, we weren't going to gel. It wasn't going to be a comfortable social environment for me. I'm not going to have anything in common with them. I live in a very different area. Like,
Mm.
I don't go on these skiing holidays, like, for example. So very early on, I just thought, you know what, I got this scholarship, I've got this privileged position. I need to make this about me getting good grades and almost in a sense proving my worth to be there, I guess. Like, there's
Mm.
that collection of stories called The Good Immigrant, and I don't know if, yeah, if you've heard of that.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's that experience because obviously I come from a different, I was given a place, but I think I still felt the need to just show my parents I could do this. It was worth it. It was worth me making this big social and academic jump.
Mhm.
And friends were just secondary to that. I just wasn't distracted by that.
Yeah. So you had your purpose, you had your focus as to what it was that you wanted to do, and you just got on with it.
I would say so. Sound like a bit of a loner now, don't
No,
I?
no, no, I don't worry.
No friends at school.
It's not that. It's just that I suppose sometimes people, and if you look at some of the academic papers, they'll say in order for somebody to be able to succeed, they must feel like they belong. Hence, the kind of like the idea here, belonging. You have to
Yeah.
feel like you belong in order to be able to succeed. But what you're saying to us was actually my focus wasn't necessarily on um, making friends. So
Mm,
I'm going to kind of like switch it up. The support network which you had from your family,
yeah.
was that more important to you? So external from the school, was that the network which you drew your strength from?
I mean, when you're a young girl going through school, you're very impressionable. And,
Mm.
I'm not going to deny that I was quite sad that I couldn't make meaningful relationships at school because as much as I told myself, I don't care about this, I'm just going home, back to, Southwest London, I deep down, I think I would have wanted some meaningful connections, but I just couldn't get it. So,
Mhm.
I'm very close to my siblings and my parents. That I think they've instilled this thing of like, just work really hard. We trust you to get on with it. You've been given this opportunity, make the most of it. So, um, I would say, without kind of neglecting that I was a teenager who needed social support in
Mhm.
school, I definitely ended up relying more to my family and some friends I had from primary school as well, who I think I was drifting away from them because we were having very different experiences by this point, but I still clung on to this idea that I could still have them in my life too.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
yeah.
Okay, okay. So after secondary, you did well at secondary school then. Academically, you did well. Yeah.
Yeah, I fulfill my purpose of not focusing on anything else but grades. I was like, great, get my credit. What a nerd.
Embrace it, right? Embrace it. It's all good, right?
Yes, Wayne, I did.
So, um, with that, with that, um, what happened for university, or what were some of the things which helped you to make your choices towards what you wanted to do at university? What were the subjects which you enjoyed and thought, okay, I could potentially do this, etc.?
Well, I've always enjoyed like history. I've always enjoyed reading,
Mm-hmm.
writing. I really enjoyed human behavior, and I think that's just something. I actually chat about this with a friend recently. I think a lot of like being like, coming from people of color living in a world which is mostly white. I think you get very used to watching people and watching how they behave and act and how they adapt themselves. And from a young age, I think, me and my siblings, we were all very observant. We all got very good at understanding human behavior. So
Mm-hmm.
when it came to my A levels and deciding about doing a degree, although when I think back, I don't know why I thought I had to do a degree. It was just the natural path when you were in private school. You just go off and do a degree.
Mm-hmm.
I focus on psychology. It seemed to combine those three elements of like being interested in people, writing and reading and evidence as well. It combined everything. I wouldn't say it's like a classic thing to choose and like culturally, but I think it keeps the door open for lots of things
Mm-hmm.
being psychology. Um, yeah.
So you went off to university. What was your university experience like doing psychology? What did you enjoy about it, etc.?
Well, we were chatting about this earlier this week. I think what ironically ended up happening by the time I got to uni, I think because I neglected a lot of my socialization at school, was I was focusing on uni being this very like fun environment where you make the best friends of your life and it's incredible. And then I got into UCL, which is, it's a great university. And then I really didn't like it. And it's not because, it's a great university, it's a great course, but I just met the same people I had at secondary school that I was wanting to get away from. The same group of people were now at university with me. And I was in London where I live anyway. And it just felt like a bit of a cutthroat world. And I was just frustrated that, like, I worked so hard to go through a school where I didn't really belong.
Yeah.
And now I'm here and I also don't belong. And, what is going on? And, I chat about it a lot with my family, and eventually what I ended up doing was I did a year at UCL and then I moved to another university because I just thought it may be like one of the best universities for psychology and I'm very grateful to get in, but like I can't spend my money on this for 3 years and be unhappy. Like I need to belong somewhere at some
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
So I moved to Birmingham.
Mm-hmm. And
University.
how was Birmingham? What was the attraction of Birmingham then, do you think?
Like we were saying before, I think it had a really nice campus feel. It just felt like a really cozy environment where everyone was in this little bubble. And I know it seems, silly now, like, we're all going to grow up one day and live out of a bubble. But at that time, I just needed to know that everyone was doing the same thing as me, and we could like cross paths and not have anything in common but make friends. And I'm not gonna lie, it took me a while again to get used to it, but eventually I did. And I think it wasn't London, so people were more friendly. I know I'm a Londoner, I can say that people in London can be just a bit full on sometimes.
Everyone's so busy trying to catch the trams and the trains and whatever else.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, cycling.
Yeah. So it was nice, but I must say, like, also demographically it was different, and this was a subconscious choice. I think it wasn't that I intended to go somewhere where obviously Birmingham has got quite a lot of Asian people, but I think it just had people who weren't the people I was growing growing up with at school, is what I mean. People who looked different as well.
Yeah. So there was. I'm not going to say it felt more homely, but it felt more welcoming than what you had experienced in your secondary school. And for you, it was almost like, actually, I don't want to continue in an environment almost like I'm not going to say oppressive, but an environment which that although you succeeded academically, there was other things which you wanted to develop yourself as a whole.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Definitely.
yeah. And as a young woman, you want to be able to know that, I'm more than just my academics.
Yeah, and there's often like a stereotype of like, you know, a hardworking Asian girl who doesn't keeps her head down and doesn't do anything. And it wasn't that I wanted to go wild or anything. I just wanted to attend to those parts of me that I neglected a bit when I was growing up in school. And it just seemed like a very safe platform to do it in. Whereas at UCL, great university again. Birmingham is a great university as well. So I had to, in a way, I was constantly convincing myself I made the right decision by just choosing me a little bit more rather than that academic excellence all the time.
So tell us a little bit about then how you got to become a research nurse, and from psychology to research nurse. What was it? Where was the transition? What happened? What's the journey from one to the other?
Well, I finished my psychology degree, realizing I didn't really want to become a psychologist. You know, you do things to know what you don't want to do, so it's okay. And I mean, I knew that I wanted to work in like the charity sector. I wanted to do something that I was immediately able to help people. So I got into like an internship with Cancer Research UK, which was really interesting. Again, a very busy London environment, but very met lots of people. And then from there, I got into, I'm quite creative with like, you know, web design and things like that. So then I got into doing like a marketing role with another charity, a smaller one, which focused on drug and alcohol use. So I got to like speak to lots of, you know, we'd call them service users, people who would need support for their drug and alcohol use. I got to go to prisons, and then I realized that actually I think I want to do something more face-to-face clinical. So at the time, nursing was a free degree in terms of your training, so that was already very appealing. And my sister at one point told me, you know, I think you'd be a really good nurse. And I don't have any nurses in my family, my mum or dad's side. So I was like, well, nurses are not people like me. Nurses are people who look a certain way and have a certain way about them, not me. But the more she said it, the more I thought, well, my sister knows me really well. And so maybe I'm missing something about myself that someone else can see. So then I just went for it, and I went through some personal stuff. I realized that I couldn't delay making decisions about maybe not what I enjoy, like listening to music and going to gigs, but maybe what I might be good at, which is actually helping people and making them feel comfortable and respond to their needs. So that's how I got into nursing. Yeah, and then from there I did my training. I had some interesting experiences with my nursing training. And then from there I mean I did some different roles, and I eventually realized that actually, despite me leaving psychology, I'd really enjoyed the research aspect of it. So let me try to get into research nursing, and then I got this role.
So before we go on to discuss a little bit more about the research role, we'll touch on it. I just wanted to, because the show is called Belonging, when you kind of like got that realization, because a lot of the things which you had mentioned about working with the charity sectors and also going into prison and doing those kinds of things, was it at that point you started feeling a sense of, you know what, I much prefer this kind of environment. I much prefer this type of interaction. Was there any particular trigger points that helped you to make up your mind?
I think it was when I was working in that drug and alcohol charity. It was when I was seeing people, because I was very comfortable behind a screen, which I do a lot more of that now, actually, to be fair. But when I was talking to people, I realized that people like they just enjoyed like time with me, and like I enjoyed time with them. So I think that's when I realized that I could use this skill a bit more. But if I'm honest, like early on, I never saw myself as someone doing like face-to-face clinical work. It was definitely something I realized later on. And it wasn't easy for me. I really had to, when I was doing my nursing training, a lot of people, it's a very natural flow for them. Like they go to the wards, they know how to talk to people, they speak to doctors. Like for me, it was every day I was like, okay, I've got to fake it till I make it, so I feel confident in this role. Not with patients, but with like being a nurse and being comfortable talking to people about their care as well. So eventually over time, you just have to trust yourself a bit, and I got used to it. But I mean, I can't deny that I didn't feel, again, when I was in my training, that I really belonged in that either. I had to tell myself, I can do this. I'm just as qualified as the next person. to be a face-to-face nurse and to have that reputation of being a nurse, which is really valued in the UK as well. So yeah, I don't know if that answered the question.
No, it definitely did. It definitely did. It was kind of like you grew into it. You grew into it's kind of grown on you. But there was that pivotal point where you said about that face-to-face interaction with your clients. That was what you realized that was kind of quite special. It was it was something that you enjoyed doing.
I think I also felt like I needed to like be of service to something. I felt like, in a way, I suppose, going through school being like, I want to get my grades, like, you know, powering through, like parting the waters to get there. But at the end of it, I was like, well, what am I doing though? Like, I'm not motivated by money. Obviously, we all need money, but it's not my motivation to be a rich person. I just want to do something helpful. But like, what's the point in slogging through school and doing this degree if I'm just going to sit there and be behind a computer doing nothing meaningful for myself? So I had to tell myself that, and I had to work hard to gain some interpersonal skills, really, and then realize that I may not do what the next person can do, but I can add my own personality to it as well, and that's just as useful. I may not be like, you know, like the classic image of a nurse. I don't know, everyone's got an image of a doctor or a nurse or whatever, which we tried to break down, but I still had it. And then eventually I was like, no, like, you know, the whole point of nursing is that you're with people, you're a person, and you're trying to preempt their responses, but it takes different people to understand a whole person. So over time.
I'm just thinking in terms of going back to what you said very early on in the interview, which was about the fact that you enjoyed people interacting with people. Kind of like that was one of the reasons why you did psychology, the history of interacting. And it almost sounds there was interactions which you liked to engage in, but then there was interactions which you kind of like stayed away from. So it was safe interactions. And in nursing, it sounds like you had those kind of like safe interactions which you could enjoy being part of. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does actually. That's an interesting observation.
It's just from what you've said, that's what it sounds to me. But one of the other things that I was going to ask then, just kind of like moving, just to see what it is that you're doing now, with the Grenfell firefighter study. Can you just give us a little flavour of what that is and what your role is in that?
Okay, so I joined this role. The project is basically focusing on the medium to long-term health outcomes of firefighters who attended the Grenfell incident back in June 2017. So the way we're doing that, we're looking at the cardiorespiratory outcomes, so lung and heart function. It's a very straightforward visit. So I carry out the visits with every firefighter. I've seen almost 700 firefighters now. It's very straightforward. We get their consent, make sure they're happy to take part in a long-term study, essentially. Do some breathing tests on them. We measure some measures of arterial stiffness, heart function. We get them to give us some details about their attendance at Grenfell and a bit their overall health. And then we also get a blood sample, which is looking at some changes in their blood, which may be linked to disease onset in later life, and links towards cancer as well. So it's kind of a holistic look, but primarily focusing on cardiorespiratory outcomes in terms of physical health. So when I meet the firefighter, I explain the study to them. I make it really clear that it's not about mental health, it's about your physical health outcomes, because a lot of them obviously have a lot of background of their attendance at Grenfell and being a firefighter overall, in terms of their mental health experience behind it. And then they ask me questions. We just talk about what their health means and what our study means. But there's quite a fine line of making sure, you know, this isn't an assessment of your fitness for work. This isn't something about occupational health. This is just about your health as a person, you being a firefighter. And then once I've seen all the people, which is by the end of this year, then we're going to start to synthesize and analyze the data and see what it means for firefighters. And there hasn't been a long-term health study on UK firefighters, I think, since like the mid to late 80s. So this is, you know, it's well overdue as well. Yeah.
So the rationale, or one of the reasons why they've chosen the Grenfell fire fighters, is because of the sheer number of firefighters which went and had to not just the initial blaze, but the ongoing situation around Grenfell. Is that the reason why they were all selected?
Yeah, exactly. So from a research angle, it's primarily that it's a very large sample of people, like you said. It's an unusual event. Now, it may not be unusual for firefighters because they see lots of different events, but it was unusual to see a residential tower block in that respect under so much fire. So the scale of it was unusual. The amount of people needed was unusual. That's why we're focusing on Grenfell. There's obviously we have to be really sensitive around the residents who attended, who are at Grenfell and are fighting for it to this day. So there's it's beyond our scope of this project to focus on the residents, but we do talk about it in terms of, like, you know, firefighters have a very different experience to what residents did at the time of Grenfell.
Yeah. That's great. It's going to sound a bit strange. Do you enjoy the role that you're and the part which you're playing in uncovering the research?
Yeah, like I've been one of those people who, you know, when like you get like, oh, there's a fellowship to apply for, or there's an internship, and you're like, yeah, I'm not going to get that. I'm not going to apply for it. I've always been one of those people who kind of shied away from doing, like, you know, the fully kind of like pay face-to-face things, which again changed when I started nursing. But with this one, yeah, it feels really like, you know, I have quite an important role to play in this research. My PIs are great as well. Like, they're very encouraging for me to take the lead on it as much as possible. So yeah, I feel like I've got a very interesting role that I never thought I would get by going into nursing. Suddenly focusing on research with firefighters is not the outcome I thought I would have. But I'll take it. It's been really interesting, and it's such a privilege to, like, I think the thing about nursing, which it sounds really cheesy when people say it, but it's always such a privilege to get really close to people in a way that, you know, you wouldn't get with other roles. Like, people do trust you and you get to be in their personal space, and it's just like, yeah, you get real insight into people.
So having had a kind of like taste of the research bug, right? And I'm just thinking again, based on the fact that you did do psychology, and part of psychology often is research element based and whatever else. Would you be interested in or I should ask, where to from here? Would you want to go on and do anything more in research? Where do you see yourself?
Are you offering me a job away?
Job interview.
Yeah. In 5 years' time. Well, I mean, I'm due to start a new role because the contract ends in December, so I need to find a new job anyway. I'm actually going to a more clinical role with the same team. So it'll be as a clinical nurse specialist with the occupational lung disease team. So I'm really excited to do more clinical work, to see lots of different people, helping to run a weekly clinic. So I'm trying to keep my feet in the clinical world as much as possible, but this role will also involve a lot of research and looking at evidence, which informs how the clinic is run. So I'm not fully in the research direction, but I don't think I ever will be. I think I want to keep up this face-to-face, getting to know people really directly, as well as, you know, respecting that I do like numbers and data and computers as well.
Whatever, I'm not going to say whatever floats your boat, but it's kind of whatever makes you feel that you belong, that makes you feel happy with what you're doing, I think is kind of like the essence of what we're kind of like discussing. I'm going to kind of like just switch it up a little bit. If anyone else has any questions which they'd like to ask, then by all means just raise your hand and we can pull you into the conversation. But I was also thinking about the fact that in terms of where to, not kind of like where to from here, but in terms of role models or people who you've looked up to, people who have been there to help to advise and to help direct you. Did you have many role models going through school, going through college, or in your career so far, which have, one thing you had said earlier on was about your sister saying to you that she felt that you would be a good nurse. So have you had anyone else who you could say, actually, that person, in hindsight, or even at the time, they kind of like helped to nurture what you enjoy doing?
Yeah, when we chatted about this earlier this week, I like what you said, that people come into your life for a reason, a season, and a time.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that. I think, like, I wouldn't say I have like, obviously I have I mean, not obviously, but I'm very grateful to have really good people in my life, loving family and friends. But I think the moments, it's like the small moments that have inspired me along the way. And my sister is a big influence on me, especially for like understanding like you beyond what you understand about yourself, like picking out things that you're like, oh, I didn't know that about myself, but okay, that's okay. Now I'm suddenly going to become a nurse. And I remember when I was at school, I had this teacher like in year two, so I was like 7, and I remember she was like this, this English lady married to this Mr. Singh, who, I always remember her because it was a very like visual thing to see as a kid. And she told me how I would, she can see me being a story writer at some point. And I thought, oh, okay. And I think like in moments of my life, I've just had like people kind of like helping me to realize that things that I'm good at, which I may not necessarily promote myself. Like, I think the way that I viewed education is very much just do the best in absolutely everything and just excel in everything. Whereas actually, it's probably more efficient to focus on the things that you're really good at and make the most of those skills that you are actually good at.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there was the teacher. So based on that, the teacher said that you should be a writer, right?
Yeah.
Or you could see you doing writing.
Yeah.
Do you enjoy writing at all?
I do actually, but like I dabble in like writing like poems on the side that I'm not going to share with anybody. It will never be made public. But I like writing academic. I mean, I'm such a nerd, Wayne. I like writing academic stuff. I love reading. Like I love words. So I wouldn't say she was off the mark, but um, I would say with my sister's one was probably really powerful on me. And my brother as well. Like at one point he told me, he kind of guided me on like how to find things that you're good at rather than that you necessarily enjoy. Like he may not realize it, but he's definitely helped me to realize that about myself. I would say because my parents, I come from a really loving family, but my parents, I would say, was very much like, we're trusting you to get on with it. Like, do well in school, make sure you enjoy your life. And then, but when you're growing up, you're kind of like, oh, what does that mean? Like, what specifically do I do? So I think my siblings really helped me to understand that, because we grew up in this country where you kind of have to choose a specific direction, otherwise you just float and end up doing random stuff. So yeah.
So I'm going to just pick up one other point which you made earlier, which was about kind of like thinking about the good immigrant, as it were. At any point, did you feel that you had to try to conform in order to fit in? Did you ever feel that you had to try to be different to what you wanted to be in order to be accepted?
I would say a resounding yes, which is quite sad when I think of it. I mean, like from the moment I came home from school that first week, and I was like to my brother, I need to be posh or I'm not going to make it in school. Yeah, like I don't want to say it's to do with this, but I do think a lot of it is adapting like culturally to things as well. Like I'm very adaptable. I could just, I have lots of different people in my life from different types of backgrounds, because I can adapt to them and I can adapt to what they want. I wouldn't say it's sacrificing me, but especially in secondary school, because everyone was really posh and very from a different environment to me, I had to adapt to them in some way to get along and just move on. And also I have very different personal interests to, like, when I was at uni in Birmingham, I wasn't like the typical kind of young Asian girl either. Like, I just had my own interest. I was off listening to Bob Dylan and like Neil Young and like old musicians, old male white musicians who no one listened to anymore. And I just thought that, okay, this is me and this is everybody else, and I'm just a bit of an outlier, and it's okay. It's okay. I'll just find a way to meet a few people, do a few work-related things that are similar to me, and I'll still be me on the side. So I would say I have had to do that. Well, I've made myself do it.
Okay, but as you said, you're adaptable. You adapt to the situations that you find yourself in, and you're making the most of it, as far as I can tell. I'm going to ask my final question, if that's all right, unless someone else has a question in the audience. Looking back, what advice? I always toss up between two questions. The first question, maybe I'll ask both of them. What would be the wow factor that your younger self might say, looking at where you are now, and they'll think, wow, I've accomplished that, right? That's one of the questions. Or you can choose which one you answer. Or what advice would you give to your younger self, say your 16-year-old self? What advice would you give to them? You can answer one, you can answer both, or you can, I'm not going to say you can't answer either, but one would, right?
Okay, Wade. Just leave already. Well, I can answer both quite succinctly, I think, because they're quite related. I would say wow, because actually I think this is quite a good practice for everyone, what you would tell your younger self. I would say wow, that, you know what, I made it in nursing. I became a nurse. I became something I never thought I would be. I'm doing something I never thought I would do, which is be with people all day, face to face. And in my personal life as well, like, I've done things I'm really proud of now I think about it. And advice I would give is really, again, this is really cliche, but just try everything. Save money, spend money, but definitely save money. And don't don't make yourself small, because I think a lot of what I was going through, if I think about it, if I make it into one statement, I just wanted to make myself small so no one could see me while I just went to the top. So I would just say make yourself, don't hide yourself. It's not worth it. Life's too short.
I like that idea, to become more visible.
Yeah, because when you are like a good immigrant, or you come from that sort of background. I mean, my dad used to sign off letters to the bank saying, I'm a law-abiding citizen. So, I come from this background of like, we must say thank you and do well. But actually, you're just as qualified as the next person to do really well. So don't just be visible,
so be more visible. I like that. I do like that. Tamanna, sorry. Yes. Right, Tamanna.
Yes.
Right. Thank you so much for being our guest on Belonging this week. You have been absolutely amazing. It's really a privilege to hear your story. Right.
Oh, thank you.
And someone has just raised their hand just as I was about to. So
I had a question, Wayne, probably. Fantastic talk. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and your experience. Not a question really, but it's just I always like to sort of listening to journeys here on the Belonging series, because I mean, you said two things. I'd probably be like your parents, because they are the immigrants and then you were born and raised here. Two things that you said that sort of really kind of stayed with me today. The thing that when you said that you chose something meaningful to you rather than, when first of all you chose to go to Birmingham rather than UCL, and it's just and I really like that, because I think being an immigrant, it's all that sort of, we migrated here, we're like academic migrants. So for us, education is the sort of the drive always, but sometimes we kind of lose sight on what sort of what's meaningful to our children, really. And
Yeah.
and yes, so thank you for sharing that. And yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much.
Oh no, thank you. That's really nice to hear.
Thank you, Tanwir. I agree with Tanwir 100%. And I just saw a comment in the chat that said they loved the fact that you said on your journey, don't be invisible, make yourself visible. Yeah, because I think sometimes don't be afraid to take up space. Don't be afraid don't be afraid in the space that you occupy. This is you. So yeah. And I think that's very important for everyone to recognize that we do have importance. You do have importance. You do have a voice. So let it be heard and let it be known. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, thank you.
No,
I'm very grateful to be here. I love this series. So
thank you, really, really, thank you so much for sharing your story. All right. I'll see about that job offer, right?
Oh yeah. That kind of unspoken offer there. Where you see yourself next year? Like, oh well.
See what we can work on.
It's okay. Thank you, Wayne, and thank you everyone for listening. And I'm glad it resonated with some people.
Brilliant. I'm going to just share what we have for next week. And next week we have. Let me just pull up the screen. Right, here we go. Next week we have Professor Fu Sung Nang, and he is a clinical senior lecturer at in the cardio electrophysiology department at Imperial College, and he'll be sharing his experiences and his story with us next week. And if you haven't heard some of the previous interviews, then please go to our YouTube channel, which is tinyurl.com/belonging-IAO. And there's a number of other things which you can also get involved with over the next few weeks. We're almost at Christmas, so we'll be closing down for Christmas in a couple of weeks. So Professor Nang is going to be our last one before the Christmas break. But I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who have contributed their stories, because without their stories, we wouldn't be where we are now. So thanks, everyone, and have a good weekend. And I'll see you again next week. Take care.
Thanks, Wayne.